So Bernadette Wegenstein is an Austrian-born linguist, author, and critically acclaimed documentary filmmaker living in Baltimore. Her work brings together her feminist thought and her interest in human-centric storytelling. Bernadette is currently a professor of media studies at the Johns Hopkins University, where she directs the Center of Advanced Media Study. And is this your fourth documentary, right?
My fourth.
This is your fourth documentary. And Annette Porter is the producer, and after 20 years advising companies on strategy and communication, she followed her passion for photography into the world of documentary films. She founded Nylon Films to create factual contents from a female perspective. As director of the Saul Zanet's Innovation Fund at Johns Hopkins University, Annette spearheads social entrepreneurship through film. We need to talk about that. Awarding grants and galvanizing industry support for young filmmakers. Thank you both so much for being here. All right. So first I want to just tell you that your film was the first film that we put on our spreadsheet. And we just use this spreadsheet like throughout all the cycle. Everything comes in and things come and go. And this one never moved. It was always there because it is an Athena movie. Like, I don't know, you've seen movies at Athena, a lot of you, and this is just feels like everything we try to do about showing the world what women can do. So I want you to talk a little bit about how you came to this story.
Well, thank you so much, and it's really such an honor to screen here, Melissa, and to know that it really fits this festival and your audience. Well, I came to making the film because at Hopkins, I'm really a colleague of Maren Alsops, who's also a professor at the Peabody Institute, where she directs the conducting program, as you saw. And so, but when I moved to Baltimore and became a professor at Hopkins, which was 2009, when I arrived, and I'm Austrian, people said, oh, here you should go to the symphony because, you're Austrian, so I'm sure you know classical music, which is sort of the stereotype, but it also, rings true in my case that I love classical music, but, I wasn't trained in it, but we can talk about that later. And so I went to see Maren, or the BSO rather, at the Meyerhoff Symphony, and I was really, really taken by the music. And it sort of did get me into this place of my childhood memories, of going to see music performed at the Concerthaus, as you saw here, but at other venues. And I do want to add, my grandfather was an opera singer, but that was during the Nazi era, so it wasn't like he was going anywhere. But the classical music was really part of my upbringing. Mm-hmm. And so I was taken by her, but then I was really taken and shocked by my reaction to her as a woman, and I said, oh my God, what's wrong with you? I mean, here you are, a feminist media scholar, and you're asking yourself, why is it odd to see a woman in this role? And I realized, I hadn't seen a female conductor of that, stature, really. And then, when I actually got to meet her through the institution, she told me more about this profession and the complete lack of a history of women conductors. And she told me the story through this anecdote of Sylvia Kaduf, who makes it into the end credits. She said, I was conducting in Lucerne, and there's this old lady sitting in the audience, and she's giving notes and things, and I'm like, whoa, she knows a lot about conducting, And then it turned out she was also an assistant to Leonard Bernstein, and, she had her own legacy, but she was completely forgotten, not just to people outside of this profession, but even within. And so Maren said to me, do you want to do something about this? Do you want to tell the story of women conductors? And then I started developing the project and actually applied for an Hopkins internal grant. And I'm going to hand this over now to Annette, which is called a Discovery Grant, which is why, we're thanking Hopkins, who, gave the seed money for this, to discover the history of women conductors. But then I really fell in love with Maren's story, and I thought, this is really the story to tell, and then all these other stories need to probably be told through that. And then we had a dean at the time of finance who's moved on, and I talked to him, and he said, well, I think if you want to bring this to the next level, so to speak, of a film, you need a producer. And we actually just hired a person, or she just came from England to us back to the US, because Annette is originally from America. And she's running this program, and she's doing all these things. And so I called Annette, and then I guess I'm going to let you finish or continue the story.
Yes, and then I fell in love with Marin's story, with Marin and with you as a storyteller. And we laugh about it. We think the dean probably put us together because he didn't really quite know what to do with either one of us individually. And he was like, oh, you'll like each other. And he was right. He was really right. And then my journey was to, in the beginning, to catch up with you. And to, as a producer, what you really do is try to help your director tell the story that they know. And which isn't always the story that the main contributor knows. But it's your vision that ends up on film, and it's been quite a journey. And like Bern, I'm really grateful to be here. I love this festival. We've kind of wanted to be here, so thank you.
So when I first started studying women directors, because when I got into this work, women directors was kind of my way in to see the lack of opportunities for women in the film industry. And there was always this kind of concept or conceit about what is a director, right? And it was, and they did research actually almost a decade ago now, and it was like, they asked people, what do you think a director looks like? And basically everyone said Steven Spielberg type person, right? A man with a cap on, white and everything. And I look at your movie, and I look at Marin, and I see the exact same thing, which is like, Leonard Bernstein is the one everyone thinks of, right? But then she is like turning that dial. So she really knows her place in history in this. And she doesn't have the ego, it seems, that the dudes have in this. And so what do you think like her legacy is in the community?
Well, I mean, I think in the community she really is perceived and read as this person who's approachable, because of course, as you just said, being a conductor or a director or just one man in front of, others and by institution overpowering, the rest of you is, comes with sort of the star system that classical music is all based in. And, historically even, the idea of conductors, by the way, isn't, something that has always existed. It's really something that came into the picture more during the Baroque era, and actually when orchestras became, much larger, because, for a string quartet, you actually, the first violinist will be your conductor. So the whole idea of the conductor rock star, is certainly a newer one, but the first one that we know and that's in the film is Gustav Mahler himself, right? So, but to go back to your question, I think that she really is perceived by her students and by the community as somebody who debunks this myth. Right. Because she also doesn't, dress up like to her rehearsals. She comes like a normal person. I'm not saying that all of the conductors, dress up to, but if you look at the worst case of any of this kind of institutionalized sexism and star system is, of course, the New Year's concert. And they're hiring people like, who are 100 years old and who can actually barely stand.
New York, is that what you said?
The Vienna New Year's,
okay.
the New Year's concert.
Okay, right, right.
And so it's a hugely politicized thing, but this year I don't want to say the name, but because I know the people who record all the Vienna New Year's concerts, Erich, who's by the way in the film, the recording producer, he told me the conductor fell asleep several times, and they had to But why does he get this gig? Because, you can give me your answers.
Institutionalized sexism.
So exactly. So she's definitely, not like that. And she's also saying, I will never be the conductor of the Vienna New Year's concert for that very reason. There's a certain glass ceiling that she actually can't break. We already said, if she does get to do this, I want to definitely make that film. And not to mention, the New Year's concert also has this awful video or film that they produce every year, for, when you don't see the asleep conductor. You see, these dancers in Austria. But anyway, so I think all of this would have to be completely renewed, if they let Maren conduct it and us make the film to it. So she's definitely, this is real. She's really going against something that's big.
Yeah, and music, it feels like a great equalizer, but also you can see how women are kept out of leadership positions. And I think that's why it's also such an Athena movie, is because the conductor is the leader. And you see her leading there in such a way that's, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And the gesturing, because you don't let women are not allowed to gesture everywhere, and she just throws it out there. And so I wanted to ask you two about you met and you created this partnership. So Annette, how were you able to fund this and make it happen and get the vision to the screen that you both?
Well, like most documentary films, it was, scrambling for nickels and dimes and then a couple of quarters, which is good. But we had some people who really believed in the film early on. Obviously, Hopkins Bloomberg Film believed in us. And as much as the money, that kind of support was game-changing, because it just gets hard.
Yeah.
When you're out there filming, you're wondering how you're going to pay for it. We took on a little debt. We did a lot of favors.
Yeah.
But also we found that people fell in love with her story. So there was a lot of trades that go on. Mm-hmm. And it really was, one of the things that Maren is she's a fierce defender and advocate of all of her mentees, the people she brings on. And it's created this community around her that people were really open and willing to help us.
Mm. What was the most surprising thing that you learned or did as part of this project, each one of you?
Mm-hmm. There's so many. I mean, I think that I had never really analyzed the institutional constraints and difficulties of, orchestral performances. And so, one problem really filming it in an engaging way rather than, a TV way where I have half a drone coming in, and then also, for instance, the TV cameras that show you who's playing, which part it is, the second violinist. That's not per se emotional, if you analyze this as a filmmaker, and a dramaturg, it's not about, we see the person who's performing this. It's really much more about where is this musical phrase going, where does it lead us emotionally, and what would I like to see? And it might be somebody who's not playing or who's playing a minor instrument, for instance, which goes along with the feminist theme of leadership. It's not that only the first violinist leads, for instance, their group. And so for me, what was surprising is how subtle and how complex, classical music is. And to understand this, as I said earlier, it brought me back to, something that I never really profoundly studied because I didn't become a musician, but it gave me at an old age the opportunity suddenly to go back into into learning it. And actually, I shadowed that conducting class for a year before, and then I hired a tutor at the Peabody, she was a PhD student, to actually go through all the scores. And so what was surprising for me is this incredible landscape of complexity and depth that you find in these scores. And as Mahler himself said about the first and two symphonies he wrote, any human emotion that exists or that he has ever felt is in there, and you find it there. And so I was really, and that's where Annette was so amazing to work with, because I was trying to do something that was really hard to see and hard to understand, that I was still even trying to figure out, and then to try and find the right means, cinematic means, to bring that to the screen. That was really what we were working on, and I think that's what makes this film also maybe different, because it's all through the music that we were able to, I think, that we tried to tell the story. And one thing that I want to add is that Stefan, our editor, he's a classically trained violinist. Okay. And so that was, of course, bringing something to the table that I didn't have. And it was incredible to work with him.
For me, there also were a lot of surprises, but I also love classical music. But I think I was more a little bit like Katie Couric. I didn't really know what a conductor did, so it was quite a surprise to find out, and a great one. And I think the parallel surprise for me was, although I loved classical music, it had never been jarring enough to me that I hadn't seen females, and it surprised me as a feminist.
You didn't
that I-
notice that there were no women.
No, I hadn't noticed that. It had just
Yeah.
been presented, and it was a surprise and a bit of a yank of a chain on me.
Yep.
It's like, wait, you didn't even protest this.
They like when we don't notice.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Does anyone have a question? Or should I keep going? Oh, Daphne? Can you go to the mic if you don't mind? Trying to record this for posterity.
This is more of a personal question about her. I was a little surprised when she was at the cemetery looking at her parents' grave that she said she never felt more alone. But
After
she
they
has
died.
a spouse, she has a son, she has all these wonderful mentees, and I just found that very touching that she said
Yeah.
that she never felt more alone.
Wasn't that referring to when they died?
Yeah, when they died, exactly. Well, but I think that, you were right that when they died, what revealed itself to her was the loneliness, that she felt as a child. And so there were some much more, I would say, drastic ways that she tells the story of this feeling of abandonment for these musician parents who are gone and who are also, very strict, and this whole revolt that she has, becoming a violinist, and this, the teachers making themselves, making you, recreate themselves in their own image. This criticism, I think, had a lot to do with the way that her parents raised her at first, and there was no question she had to be a musician and all that. But in the film, I really tried to dial down the psychologization, so to speak, because I don't think it's the right place for the documentarian to be the shrink. However, I used as much as I needed to move the story forward. That was my goal. But there are certain things in there that will definitely give you a hint into something, to say it with the Mahler Symphony, that then will find itself really at the very deep, deep bottom of meaning. And it's there. And the sense of loneliness is absolutely in her. And
She travels, she moves around.
Yeah.
We have a last question. I want to talk a little about the queerness, it doesn't seem to have caused any stigma or anything like that, or did you leave that out? I mean, is that something that's, a big part of her? I mean, it's interesting.
It's interesting, right? Because I didn't want to, put the finger at her that she's queer unless it had a reason for the story to drive the story forward again. And since there weren't, and I did actually ask her this question, do you think you were discriminated against because you're queer or gay? And she said, actually, no, it was enough that I was a woman because people wouldn't even ask, those further questions, actually. And so that's why I kept it at that and showed her, life with Kristen as something that we all agree, that is normal, that is part of her personality, but it's not part of something that I wanted to point my finger at. And what is really beautiful about the film, that we've played a lot of LGBTQ plus festivals as well, and the communities when we play there are actually very thankful that we didn't make this into this sort of token and say,
Right.
hey, she's the gay conductor.
She's the queer conductor.
Yeah, I think that was important for Maren too.
Yeah.
It's part of who she is, but it's not all of who she is.
Right.
Absolutely.
Normalization. I think we have to go. One more?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do it.
Sorry, I had a quick question. I'm actually Brazilian, so I wanted to know how your experience filming in Brazil was, because that was very exciting to see. Also, the cameo by one of our old presidents was a little shocking for me.
I'm sure it is, because my Brazilian friends are like, oh my God. Yeah, so Brazil was absolutely my favorite place to film at. And we're still so close with Enrique, who was the field producer, and he just visited me a week ago. So we've became very close, and on our next film. He's gonna, so the ties to Brazil are still lasting. And I had been to Brazil several times myself as well, so I speak Portuguese, which was one of the reasons I chose it, because, at the beginning of the production, she went through her calendar and she said, okay, here it is, Berna. I'm doing, the magic flute in Sao Paulo. I'm there, the combination of the magic flute and the location. And it was just magical, because when we said, oh, how are we going to film? Could Shauna actually sit in the orchestra? And they said, yeah, sure, we'll build you a podium. They were so accommodating. Compare that to the 5 minutes we were allowed to film with the BSO and the Copeland. The reason it's so short is because of the unions, but also the whole, the production was really difficult in America because of all the laws. And the laws exist too, but people in Brazil and in Vienna, I have to say, they were much more accommodating of the cameras to film during live. So I loved absolutely, filming there.
That's such a shame that the BSO, because this is a love letter to them.
Yeah.
Sort of, but then there's also the revelation of how they hired her, with the scandal, of, so the relationship between her and the BSO is not very good, and we showed that. And the BSO, they came to the Tribeca opening, but when they saw that this whole part was in the film, they did crunch. Yeah. But I didn't make the film for them, so, they had to live with that.
And she's done so much for the community and the kids
For
there.
the community and the musicians, I think she's got a very strong relationship with all of them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much
Yeah,
for coming.
thank
your time.
you.